My name is Raymond Callahan, and I am 66 years old. Last night, I saw my children's vacation photos on Facebook. 3 children, their spouses, 7 grandchildren, my oldest son's golden retriever, and even my daughter's neighbor who had somehow become basically family, all standing barefoot on a white beach in matching blue shirts. My daughter Melissa had posted the caption in big bright letters, "Family is everything." I sat at my kitchen table in Ohio with my coffee going cold and my father's prescription bag beside my elbow, and I stared at that picture longer than I should have. I zoomed in once, then again, as if maybe I had missed myself somewhere in the back row. I had not. My father was not there either. Frank Callahan, 89 years old, the man who bought the lake cabin they all used for free, was sitting in his recliner in my living room watching an old baseball game with the sound too low because he did not like to bother anyone. 30 minutes after Melissa posted that picture, my oldest son Brian texted me. "Dad, don't forget the cabin tax is due Friday. Also, Grandpa's heart pills need pickup before the weekend." No mention of the beach. No mention of the photo. No mention of the word family he had smiled under with everyone except the 2 men who had paid for most of it. What none of them knew, as they smiled under that caption, was that the cabin they kept using had already stopped belonging to the version of the family they believed in. I did not answer Brian right away. That was new for me. Most of my life, I answered quickly. I answered when my kids called about a broken water heater, a late mortgage payment, a grandson who needed picking up from baseball practice, a car that would not start, a dog that needed watching, a lake cabin roof that needed patching before the 4th of July weekend. I answered because I was their father, and fathers answer. At least that was what I told myself. But that night, I looked across the small kitchen at the wall calendar where I had written Frank's cardiology appointment in blue ink and the lake cabin tax deadline in red ink, and something old inside me finally stopped moving. I was not angry in the loud way people expect. I did not throw my phone. I did not call Brian and ask why. I had asked why for too many years, and every answer had been a prettier way of saying the same thing. "You do not fit where we are going, Dad. You are useful at home." Frank called from the living room, "Ray, did they win yet?" He meant the Indians, though the team had changed names years earlier and he still called them what he had called them since before I was born. I stood up, took the prescription bag with me, and walked into the room. The late afternoon light was coming through the blinds in thin lines across the carpet. Frank sat in the brown recliner I had bought him after his hip started bothering him. His hands rested on the blanket over his knees. On the side table beside him were his reading glasses, a glass of water, a Medicare envelope I still needed to sort, and a small dish where he kept butterscotch candies like a man preparing for visiting children who rarely came. "They're tied," I said. He glanced at me. "You look like somebody turned off the lights." I almost smiled. "Nothing." Frank turned down the television himself. That alone told me he knew it was not nothing. "Raymond." When a man is 66 years old and his father still uses his full name, some part of him becomes 12 again. I held up the prescription bag. "Brian reminded me about your pills." "Did he?" "And the cabin tax." Frank looked at the television but did not turn the sound back up. "Did he mention Hawaii?" I said nothing. His mouth tightened, not with surprise but with a sorrow he had learned to carry quietly. "Melissa posted?" I looked at him. "You saw it?" "Marisol showed me how to check things on that tablet she gave me." "I don't like it. Everybody smiles too hard." He paused. "But yes. I saw it." I sat down on the couch opposite him. For a minute, the only sound in the house was the old refrigerator humming in the kitchen. I had repaired that refrigerator twice because buying new felt wasteful, a habit Mary used to tease me about. Frank said, "They left you out again." "They left both of us out." He nodded slowly. "No. They left you out. They left me with you." That sentence landed harder than I wanted it to. I looked at my hands. They were still strong hands, though the knuckles were swollen and the nails never looked clean no matter how much I scrubbed. 38 years as a union electrician leaves evidence. My children used to be proud of those hands. Brian would ask me to show his friends the scar across my thumb from a panel door that slipped in 1987. Melissa used to put her tiny hand inside mine and say mine looked like a catcher's mitt. Todd used to ask how I knew which wire was safe to touch, and I would say, experience and fear, in that order. Somewhere along the way, those hands had stopped being proof of skill and become proof that I was meant to fix things nobody else wanted to touch. The first time my children left me behind, I was 46, not old, not sick, not slow. My wife Mary had been gone 9 months. Cancer took her in a way that still makes me measure time by before and after. Before Mary, the house smelled like cinnamon toast and laundry soap on Saturday mornings. After Mary, the house smelled like coffee, dust, and old work shirts because I did not know how to make a home breathe the way she did. I had 3 children then. Brian was 22 and already selling houses with the confidence of a man who would never crawl through an attic in August to fix bad wiring. Melissa was 19 and in community college, sweet when she wanted something, distant when she did not. Todd was 16, all shoulders and attitude, convinced that every rule in the house was a personal attack. That summer, Brian said the family needed something cheerful after everything we had been through. He wanted to organize a beach trip to North Carolina. He said Mary would have wanted us to keep living. I agreed with that. Mary had always loved the ocean. She used to say the sound of waves made her feel like God was breathing slowly. I went out and bought a new duffel bag from the Walmart near the highway. Nothing fancy. Navy blue, 2 side pockets, strong zipper. I packed 2 pairs of shorts, my brown sandals, a stack of paperback westerns, and the old Canon camera Mary had given me on our 25th anniversary. I remember setting that bag by the front door and feeling nervous in a hopeful way, like maybe this trip would keep the family from drifting apart. The morning they left, Brian came into the kitchen while I was making toast for my father. Frank was 70 at the time, still strong enough to split wood, stubborn enough to refuse help with anything, but his blood pressure had been acting up. Brian looked at the duffel by the door and said, "Dad, we talked about it, and Grandpa really should not be alone this week." I said, "I thought your Aunt Linda was going to check on him." Melissa, who had just come downstairs with a beach hat on, looked at the floor. Todd kept loading coolers into Brian's SUV as if he had gone deaf. Brian rubbed the back of his neck and gave me the kind of smile people use when they have already decided and only want you to make it easy for them. "It's just better if you stay. You know his medicines. And honestly, Dad, with everything that happened with Mom, I don't know if a crowded beach house is the right place for you." That was how they framed it the first time. Concern. Tenderness. Practicality. I wanted to argue. I wanted to say I had lost my wife too, and maybe the ocean would help me breathe. But Frank was sitting in the living room pretending not to hear, and Mary's picture was still on the mantel with the funeral flowers dried brown in a vase beside it. So I said okay. That was my mistake. Not because staying with my father was wrong. Taking care of him was never wrong. The mistake was teaching my children that I could be removed from a family plan if they wrapped the knife in a soft enough reason. They sent pictures every day. Melissa with seashells. Todd buried in sand. Brian holding a plate of shrimp in a restaurant with paper napkins and string lights behind him. The last night, they took a group picture on the beach at sunset. Brian posted it with the caption, "Healing Together." I saw it while Frank was asleep in his chair and the Weather Channel was warning about storms over Lake Erie. I told myself they needed it more than I did. That became another habit that hurt me. Whenever my children took something from me, I explained it to myself as something they needed. When they came home, sunburned and full of stories, I had made pot roast because I thought a hot meal would help the house feel normal. Todd dropped his sandy backpack by the door. Melissa hugged me quickly, then went upstairs to shower. Brian handed me a souvenir mug that said Outer Banks Dad. I remember looking at it and feeling something inside me fold. A mug was supposed to stand in for the seat they had not saved. I still have it somewhere in a box in the garage. I used it once. Coffee tasted like apology without the courage to say sorry. The second time happened the following winter. Colorado ski trip. I did not ski, which made the excuse easier. Dad, you would be bored, Melissa said. You hate cold weather. I had spent 30 years working in unfinished buildings in February, my hands so cold I could barely grip wire strippers. I did not hate cold weather. I hated being told what I hated by people who never asked. But I stayed home again because Frank had slipped on ice 2 weeks earlier, and someone had to make sure he did not try to shovel the driveway. That week, Frank and I ate canned soup and watched old movies. I drove him to a follow-up appointment, stopped at the pharmacy, salted both our driveways, and repaired a loose outlet in Melissa's laundry room because she called from Colorado saying the dryer kept shutting off. She said, "Dad, you're a lifesaver," while I stood in her basement with dust on my shoulders and a screwdriver in my teeth. That night she posted a picture of herself in a ski lodge with hot chocolate. The caption read, "Nothing better than family time." I had family time too. Mine came with a breaker box and a pharmacy receipt. Then came Disney with the grandkids. That one hurt in a different way. I had imagined taking my grandchildren to Disney since before the first one was born. Not because I cared about rides. I wanted to see their faces. I wanted to buy overpriced ice cream and pretend not to notice when they got sticky. I wanted to sit on a bench with Mary, if she had lived, and watch the next generation run ahead. By then Mary had been gone 7 years, and the oldest grandkids were just the right age. Melissa brought it up at a Sunday dinner. Everybody got excited. The kids shrieked. Todd joked about needing a second mortgage for mouse ears. I said, "I can help with some of it." Brian looked at me too quickly. "Dad, that's generous, but we already booked rooms." "Oh," I said. "All right." Melissa said, "It's just going to be chaos, Dad. Long lines, heat, strollers. You'd hate it." "I handled 3 kids at Cedar Point in 1994, I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I think I could survive a stroller." Mark, Melissa's husband, laughed awkwardly. Nobody else did. Todd said, "Come on, Dad. You get tired walking around Costco." That was not true, but everyone smiled because jokes are how families test cruelty. I looked at my grandson Caleb, who was 5. He climbed into my lap and said, "Grandpa Ray, you can come next time." Next time. Children learn the language adults hand them. They went without me. I paid for 2 of the grandchildren's tickets because Melissa called crying about how expensive everything had become. Frank stayed with me. The second day, he had a dizzy spell, and I spent 6 hours at urgent care. While we waited under fluorescent lights, my phone buzzed with a video of Caleb meeting a costumed character. He looked delighted. I was happy for him. That is the part people do not understand. Being hurt and being happy for someone can live in the same chest. It just makes the chest tired. The 4th big exclusion was Thanksgiving at the lake cabin. That should have been impossible because the cabin was only 2 hours away and big enough if people were willing to be uncomfortable in the way families used to be. Folding cots, sleeping bags, kids on the floor, adults making coffee in shifts. That was how Mary and I raised them to understand holidays. But by then, comfort had become more important than inclusion. Brian called 2 weeks before Thanksgiving. "Dad, we're going to do the cabin this year. Just the kids and grandkids. Keep it simple." "Simple," I said. "You know what I mean. Less cooking, less stress. Frank loves Thanksgiving up there." There was a pause. "Yeah, but the stairs are rough. He can sleep downstairs." "Dad, the downstairs bed is where Stacy's sister will be." I remember looking at the wall in my garage where my old level hung. Mary had written my name on it in marker years earlier because Todd kept borrowing tools and not returning them. "I see." Brian softened his voice. "Could you maybe bring the turkey up Wednesday, get the heat going, check the plumbing, and then you and Grandpa can have a quiet holiday at your place? We'll stop by Friday on the way back." I wanted to ask him if he hurt himself. I wanted to ask when bringing the turkey became different from being invited to eat it. Instead, I said, "Who's cooking it?" Stacy ordered one from the grocery store. You just have to pick it up. So that Wednesday, I drove to Kroger, picked up a prepaid turkey and sides, drove 2 hours to the cabin, turned on the heat, checked the pipes, replaced a blown porch bulb, swept mouse droppings from under the sink, and put their food in the refrigerator. On the kitchen counter, Stacy had left a printed seating plan for the table. Names in neat boxes. Brian, Stacy, Melissa, Mark, Todd, kids, Stacy's sister, Stacy's mother. No Ray. No Frank. I stood there in that kitchen where Mary once burned rolls and laughed until she cried, and I folded the seating plan in half, then unfolded it because I did not want to be the kind of man who hid evidence from himself. Thanksgiving Day, Frank and I ate turkey breast from a diner takeout container. Donna from Miller's Diner gave us extra pie. She said, "You boys should have been somewhere with a real table," and I almost told her we had one. We just had not been given seats. The fifth one came at my granddaughter Lily's middle school graduation. It was not a vacation exactly, but it showed me the same arrangement in smaller form. Melissa planned a weekend in Chicago afterward, museums and a nice hotel, just the immediate family. She called me 2 days before and asked if I could keep Frank because the hotel would be too much for him. I said I understood. Then she added, "And Dad, can you not make this awkward at the ceremony?" Lily gets sensitive. "We just want easy pictures this time." Easy pictures. I knew what that meant. Pictures without explaining why an old man in a worn suit and another older man with a cane were standing slightly apart from the polished family unit. I went anyway because Lily had invited me herself. I sat near the back with Frank. After the ceremony, Lily ran to me first and put her arms around my waist. Melissa saw the photographer turn toward us and quickly said, "Lily, honey, come over here with your parents." She did not say I could not be in the picture. She simply moved the picture somewhere I was not. That night, Melissa texted me from Chicago. "Dad, Lily loved the card. Thank you for understanding about the weekend. Also, Mark said the cabin bathroom sink is leaking again. Could you check it before Brian's July trip?" I did check it. I replaced the trap, tightened the supply line, and found a silver bracelet under the vanity that belonged to Stacy's sister. She had been there, apparently, on a weekend nobody told me about. By 55, I had become the man who kept the back door open for everyone else. I was still working then as a union electrician. I left the house before sunrise with a thermos of coffee, drove my old Ford F-150 to job sites, and spent 10 hours inside schools, hospitals, grocery stores, and office buildings, pulling wire, replacing panels, and fixing mistakes made by people half my age who thought speed mattered more than doing things right. My hands were rough. My knees complained every morning. My back had a weather forecast of its own. But I was proud of my work. There is dignity in making lights come on. People forget that until they are standing in the dark. At work, men still respected me. Younger guys called me Ray or Mr. Callahan depending on how their fathers had raised them. They asked me how to read old plans, how to fish wire through a wall without tearing half of it open, how to tell when a breaker was bad or when somebody was lying about what they plugged in. But at home, slowly, I became just Dad. Not the man who paid for braces. Not the man who worked double shifts after Mary got sick. Not the man who refinanced the house to help Brian start his real estate license program. Not the man who drove Melissa to night classes because she was afraid of the parking lot. Not the man who sat outside Todd's rehab meeting when he was 23 and too ashamed to look at me. Just Dad. Reliable, available, and increasingly invisible. The lake cabin was the center of it all, though none of them wanted to admit that. Frank bought it in 1978, back when a working man could still buy a rough little place by the water if he saved, borrowed, and did half the repairs himself. It sat 2 hours north of us, near a quiet lake with a crooked dock and pine trees that dropped needles into the gutters no matter how often you cleaned them. It was not fancy. 2 bedrooms, 1 sleeping porch, a kitchen with yellow cabinets, an old wood stove that smoked if the wind came from the east, and a screened porch where Mary used to drink coffee in one of my flannel shirts. But to my children, that cabin became a free resort with family history attached. When they were little, I loved taking them there. Brian learned to bait a hook off that dock. Melissa used to collect smooth stones along the shore and name them after people in her class. Todd carved his initials under the porch rail with a pocket knife he was not supposed to have. Mary planted daylilies by the steps. My mother made potato salad in a blue bowl that still sits in the lower cabinet. Frank taught the grandkids how to skip rocks and how to listen for rain moving across the lake before you could feel it. Those were real memories. Good ones. I will not pretend everything was bad. That is what made the later years hurt more. You cannot grieve a family unless you remember loving it. After my mother died, Frank put the cabin into a living trust. He said it would keep things simple when he was gone. At the time, nobody paid much attention. Brian skimmed the papers like he understood them. Melissa said she did not want to talk about death. Todd asked if the cabin would eventually be split 3 ways. Frank told him, eventually, everything goes where it belongs. Todd laughed and said, so to us. Frank did not laugh. I noticed that, but I did not understand it then. As Frank got older, the cabin needed more work. Roof patching. New water heater. Electrical upgrades, which I handled. Dock repairs after a winter storm. Property taxes that rose every few years. Insurance. Tree removal after a pine came down behind the shed. A breaker panel replacement after Brian's friend plugged 3 space heaters into one old circuit during a hunting weekend he claimed was just family. Pipe insulation after Todd forgot to keep the heat above 50 in February. A new screen door after someone's dog tore through it. A gravel delivery after Melissa complained the driveway looked too rough for family photos. My children used the place constantly, especially once they had their own kids, but somehow the bills always found my mailbox. Brian would say, "Dad, I'll get you back after closing this next house." Melissa would say, "Can you cover it this time?" Mark and I are stretched with the kids. Todd would say, "Why do you care? You spend more time there than anybody." That last part was almost funny. I spent more time there because I was the one fixing it after they left. They left beer cans in the fire pit, wet towels in the bathtub, broken screen doors, empty propane tanks, and once an entire trash bag of crab shells in August. I drove up Monday mornings after their weekends and opened windows, scrubbed counters, reset breakers, checked for leaks, and walked the property line with a notebook like a caretaker. I bought supplies at Harlan's Hardware, where the owner knew my father and always asked, "What did those kids break now?" I laughed it off because that was easier than saying the truth aloud. I told myself I did it for Frank. I told myself I did it for Mary's memory. I told myself keeping the cabin alive was keeping the family alive. But somewhere along the way, my children stopped seeing me as the person preserving it and started seeing me as part of the maintenance. The travel exclusions became worse after I retired. I thought retirement might soften things. I imagined more time with the grandkids, maybe short trips, maybe breakfast at diners with Brian, maybe helping Todd build something in his garage, maybe taking Melissa's kids fishing. Instead, retirement made me more available. If I was not working, then surely I could watch Frank. If I had a pension, then surely I could cover a bill until somebody sorted things out. If I lived alone, then surely I would not mind a grandson dropped off for a weekend with one backpack and no clear pickup time. One year, they rented a big house in Myrtle Beach. I found out because my granddaughter left a printed packing list on my kitchen table after I watched her for Melissa. Sunscreen. Flip-flops. Pool toys. Matching shirts. Family photo Wednesday. My name was nowhere on the list. When I asked Melissa about it, she blinked like I had asked something embarrassing. "Dad, it's mostly for the kids," she said. "And you know Grandpa doesn't travel well." "Did anybody ask Grandpa?" I said. She sighed. "Dad." That one word carried so much. Dad meant don't make this difficult. Dad meant be reasonable. Dad meant understand your place without forcing us to say it out loud. Another year, they went to a resort in Arizona for Brian's birthday. His 50th was still years away, but he called 40 a milestone because it gave him a reason to rent a house with a pool. I mailed him a card with a check inside. He sent me one text, "Thanks, Dad." The next day, Facebook showed me photos of him raising a margarita with his siblings beside him. My grandson wore a shirt that said Callahan Family Trip. I sat in my truck outside the pharmacy where I had just picked up Frank's blood pressure medication and stared at that shirt until the letters blurred. Frank saw more than my children thought he did. Old men are often treated like furniture in family rooms. People talk around them, over them, sometimes about them, as if age turns a man into a lamp. But Frank had sharp eyes. He forgot small things, like where he put his reading glasses or whether he had already salted his eggs, but he remembered character. He remembered who showed up. He remembered who left. One evening, maybe 12 years into this pattern, I drove him home from a cardiology appointment. It was raining hard enough that the wipers could barely keep up. We stopped at Miller's Diner because Frank liked their meatloaf and because I did not feel like cooking. The waitress, Donna, knew us by then. She called Frank Mr. C and always brought him extra gravy without asking. We sat in a booth by the window, water running down the glass, red taillights smearing on the road outside. Frank watched me stir coffee I did not need and said, "They went somewhere again." I looked up. "Who?" He gave me a look that said I was too old to play dumb with my own father. "Your kids." I shrugged. "Just a long weekend. Wisconsin Dells, I think. For the grandkids. And you are here with me. I don't mind. I know you don't." He cut his meatloaf slowly, his hand shaking just a little. "That's what worries me." I did not answer. He said, "There is a difference between being kind and being trained." That sentence stayed with me. At the time, I smiled because I did not know what else to do. "I'm fine, Dad." He looked out at the rain. "No. You're useful." That is not the same thing. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. I wanted to defend my children, because fathers do that even when their children are guilty. I wanted to say Brian was busy, Melissa had stress, Todd had always been rough around the edges but meant well. I wanted to build a little fence around them with excuses. But Frank had built enough fences in his life to know when one was rotten. A few months after that, he asked me to take him to see an estate attorney. I assumed he wanted to update basic paperwork. Medical directives, power of attorney, maybe something about the cabin after he passed. I drove him to a brick office near the county courthouse, a place with brass lamps, framed certificates on the wall, and a receptionist who spoke in the quiet voice people use around wills. The attorney's name was Ellen Brooks. She was in her 50s, calm, with silver at her temples and the kind of voice that made people sit straighter without feeling scolded. Frank asked me to wait in the lobby during the first meeting. I did. I read a fishing magazine from 2009 and drank coffee from a paper cup while my father talked behind a closed door. When he came out, he looked tired but peaceful. I asked if everything was okay. He said, "It will be." I did not press. That was another old habit in our family. Men did not press other men when their faces said not yet. Years passed. Ellen's office became a place Frank visited once or twice a year. Sometimes I drove him. Sometimes my cousin Daniel did. My children knew about it vaguely but did not care. Brian once joked, "Grandpa's probably making sure none of us sell the fishing rods." Todd laughed and said, "As long as he doesn't leave everything to Dad's truck." Melissa said, "Don't be morbid." They were not afraid of Frank's paperwork because they assumed paperwork would honor the same family story they had written for themselves. They were the future. I was the helper. Frank was the sentimental old man. The cabin would eventually become their shared playground. The funny thing about being ignored is that people forget you can still hear them. They forget you are in the kitchen when they talk in the dining room. They forget your phone is on the family group text. They forget receipts come to your email because you paid the deposits. They forget old men know where the folders are. I heard Brian complain once that I made cabin scheduling awkward because I always wanted to know who was going. That was because insurance needed accurate information after Todd let a friend borrow the cabin and the friend backed a boat trailer into the shed. I heard Melissa tell her husband Mark that I had become sensitive since retirement. That was because I asked why they had planned a Christmas cabin weekend without telling me until they needed me to bring firewood. I heard Todd tell Brian that I would never stand up to them because I was afraid of ending up alone. That one, I heard from the hallway while carrying a laundry basket of Frank's clothes. Todd did not know I was there. Brian did not correct him. Afraid of ending up alone. I thought about that for a long time. Maybe he was right in a way. After Mary died, loneliness moved into my house like a quiet tenant. It sat in her chair. It walked beside me in the grocery store when I reached for cereal she used to buy. It filled the passenger seat of my truck on Sunday drives. I did not want more of it. So I accepted scraps. A birthday lunch squeezed between my children's errands. A Father's Day card signed by grandkids but bought by Melissa at the last minute. A phone call from Brian that always turned into a request. A Thanksgiving plate saved for me after I stayed home with Frank because the house was too crowded. I told myself scraps were better than an empty table. I was wrong. Scraps teach your heart to crawl. The people who kept me from crawling were not the people I had raised. They were the ones who never made a speech about family because they were too busy acting like it. My mother's younger brother Javier lived 20 minutes away in a small ranch house with a backyard full of tomato plants and wind chimes. He was not really my uncle by blood in the way people obsess over. He had married my mother's sister, and after she passed, he remained ours because love had made the paperwork irrelevant. Every summer he hosted a barbecue behind his house. Folding tables, ribs, corn, cheap beer, kids running through sprinklers, old men arguing about baseball, women laughing in lawn chairs, somebody's dog stealing hamburger buns. The first time I showed up alone after my children went on one of their trips, Javier did not ask why I was not with them. He handed me tongs and said, "Ray, turn those sausages before my guests start chewing charcoal." That was it. No pity. No interrogation. A job, a plate, a place. His son Daniel played horseshoes with me until dark. His daughter Elena sent me home with foil-wrapped ribs for Frank. At Christmas, they held a church basement dinner for anybody who did not want to sit alone. They always saved 2 chairs, one for me, one for Frank. When Frank got slower, Daniel helped me get him inside. When Frank's hands shook, Elena cut his ham without making him feel like a child. Nobody posted captions about family. Nobody needed to. One night, after a 4th of July cookout, Frank and I sat in Javier's backyard while the younger people cleaned up. Fireflies blinked over the grass. My knees hurt. Frank had a blanket over his legs even though the air was warm. He watched Daniel and Elena carrying dishes inside and said, "You see that?" "See what?" "They don't make you earn the chair." I looked at him. He nodded toward the folding chair under me. "They just put it out." I swallowed something hard. "Yeah." Frank's voice got quiet. "Remember that." I did. Not quickly enough, but I did. The final summer began with an email thread. Brian started it because he liked organizing things in writing when money was involved. Subject line, Callahan Family Summer Plans. I saw the names in the recipient list: Brian, his wife Stacy, Melissa, her husband Mark, Todd, his girlfriend Rachel, older grandkids with emails now, even Stacy's sister because she might join for part of the trip. My name was there too, but only because Brian needed information about the cabin calendar. The plan, apparently, was a 10-day trip to Hawaii. Big house. Beach access. Family photos. Snorkeling. Luau. Brian wrote, "This might be the last year we can get everyone together before the kids scatter, so let's make it special." I stared at everyone for a while. Then I read further. Near the bottom, Brian had written, "Dad, we assume you'll stay with Grandpa since travel that far would be too much for him. Can you also check the cabin and make sure the AC units are working before we use it in August? Property tax is due soon too. Let us know if you need help, but it should be same as last year. Same as last year. Same as every year. I typed 3 different replies and deleted all of them. The first was angry. The second was pathetic. The third sounded like a man begging for an invitation to his own family. I sent none. Instead, I walked into the living room where Frank sat with a magnifying glass and a paperback western. "Dad," I said, "did you know about Hawaii?" He looked up slowly. "Melissa mentioned beaches. Did they invite you?" He gave me a small smile without humor. "Ray, I am 89 years old. People don't invite me places. They decide where I belong." I sat down across from him. His hands rested on the arms of the recliner, spotted with age, veins raised like blue wires under thin skin. Those hands had built porch steps, fixed boat motors, held babies, buried my mother, and signed papers my children had never cared to read. "Do you want to go?" I asked. "To Hawaii?" He chuckled. "No. Too far. Too many airports. Too many people in flower shirts pretending they invented happiness." I smiled despite myself. He looked at me for a long moment. "But I would like to see the ocean again before I go." The words entered the room gently, but they changed its temperature. "Before I go." He said it without drama, like a man mentioning rain. I looked at my father, really looked at him, and saw how much smaller he had become inside his cardigan. I thought of all the times he had sat in my living room while the rest of the family stood on beaches and mountain decks and cruise ship balconies. I thought of him pretending not to notice. I thought of me pretending not to hurt. 2 grown men trained to make ourselves convenient. "Then we'll see it," I said. He watched me carefully. "Don't say things to comfort an old man." "I'm not." "You sure?" "No," I said honestly. "But I'm tired of not being sure." That night, after Frank went to bed, I opened the old metal file box in my hall closet. The box had belonged to Mary. She labeled everything in neat handwriting: insurance, taxes, appliance manuals, kids' school records, cabin, medical, savings. I had avoided some of those folders for years because grief hides in paper. Her life insurance information was in a blue folder near the back. After she died, I used part of the money for medical bills and funeral costs, put some toward the mortgage, and left the rest in a savings account we had once called the Someday Fund. Someday we'll take the train across the country. Someday we'll see Maine in the fall. Someday we'll rent a beach house with nobody needing us for anything. Someday is a dangerous word. It lets you postpone joy until life has no obligation left, and life always finds another obligation. I checked the account balance. It was not huge, but it was enough. Enough for flights if we kept them short. Enough for rooms somewhere comfortable. Enough for my father to put his feet in salt water. Enough to invite people who had never made me ask twice. Then, because Brian's text about the cabin tax was still sitting unanswered, I opened the cabin folder. What began as a practical check became something else. I spread papers across the kitchen table, year after year, bill after bill. Property taxes. Insurance. Hardware store receipts. Dock repair invoices. County recorder notices. Bank transfers. Roof materials. Plumbing supplies. A hotel receipt from the year Frank had a procedure and I stayed near the hospital while my children were at the cabin for Labor Day. A receipt for a new refrigerator Brian said he would split 3 ways and never did. A credit card statement showing I paid for the gravel Melissa wanted because the driveway looked bad in pictures. An invoice from a handyman for repairing damage after Todd's fishing buddies used the sleeping porch like a locker room. I started writing numbers on a legal pad. At first, I thought I would stop after 10 minutes. Then I found myself sorting by year. Midnight passed. The house was quiet. Frank coughed once in his room, then settled. I kept adding. Not because I wanted to punish anyone, but because for the first time I needed to see the shape of what I had been calling love. By 2 in the morning, the number on the bottom of the page made me sit back. Over 20 years, not counting my labor, not counting fuel, not counting missed work, not counting the way my life had been arranged around everyone else's convenience, I had paid more than most men spend on a brand new truck. I thought of Todd asking why I cared. I thought of Brian saying same as last year. I thought of Melissa saying easy pictures. I placed both hands flat on the table and let the truth sit there under the kitchen light. I had not been helping occasionally. I had been subsidizing a family that did not save me a chair. The next morning, I called Javier. He answered on the third ring, wind in the background like he was already outside with his plants. Raymond, he said. He always used my full name when he was happy. You finally calling to admit my ribs are better than yours? I need to ask you something. His tone shifted. Everything okay? Would you and some of the family want to take a trip with me and Dad? To the ocean. Not Hawaii. Somewhere easier. Maybe the Outer Banks or Florida Keys. I'll cover the house or hotel. I just want Dad to see the water. Javier was quiet so long I thought the call dropped. Uncle Jav? I'm here, he said. His voice sounded thicker. How many years have you been waiting to ask that? I closed my eyes. He did not make me answer. Tell me when, he said. We'll come. Within a week, what began as a quiet idea became a real plan. Daniel and Elena wanted in. Javier's granddaughter Marisol asked if Frank liked pancakes because she knew a place near Key Largo. My cousin's wife said she would help with Frank's medications and airport assistance. Nobody asked what they would get. Nobody asked if there was room. Nobody said travel would be easier without the old man. They asked what Frank needed. They asked whether I needed help pushing a wheelchair through the airport. They asked if I preferred an oceanfront room or one near the elevator for convenience. I sat at my kitchen table reading their messages, and for the first time in years, a family trip did not feel like a door closing. Before I booked anything, I took Frank to his doctor. I did not want to be careless with him just because I was tired of being careful for everyone else. Dr. Patel had treated Frank for years and spoke to him like a man, not a medical chart. He checked Frank's vitals, reviewed his medications, and listened while Frank described wanting to see the ocean. Dr. Patel smiled. You planning to swim to Cuba, Frank? Frank said, depends on the food. The doctor laughed, then looked at me. A short flight is manageable. Wheelchair assistance at the airport. Keep him hydrated. No overdoing it in heat. Bring medication copies. If he gets short of breath, you know what to do. Frank pointed at me. He always knows what to do. That's why everybody gives him things. Dr. Patel glanced between us but did not pry. He signed the travel clearance and printed medication instructions. I folded those papers carefully and put them in the folder. Not because I expected trouble. Because after years of being accused of overreacting or underreacting depending on what someone needed from me, I had learned that paper remembers what people deny. A few days before we left, Brian stopped by my house to drop off his dog, Duke, even though he had not really asked. He stood in my kitchen wearing sunglasses on his head and a polo shirt with his real estate company logo. Duke ran straight to Frank, who slipped him a cracker. Thanks for keeping him while we're gone, Brian said. Boarding prices are ridiculous. I looked at Duke, then at Brian. I'm not keeping him. Brian blinked. What? I won't be here. He laughed once, like I had told a joke wrong. Where are you going? Out of town. Dad, we leave tomorrow. I know. His smile tightened. You didn't mention this. You didn't ask. That was the first small crack. He stared at me in my own kitchen as if furniture had spoken. Who's watching Grandpa? Grandpa is coming with me. Now he removed the sunglasses from his head. Coming where? To the ocean. Brian's mouth opened, then closed. He glanced toward the living room where Frank had turned the baseball game up one notch. Dad, that's not a good idea. He's fragile. He has doctor clearance. You got doctor clearance? Yes. When? Last week. Brian looked offended, not worried. That told me something. I wish you would have coordinated with us. Why? Because we're family. I had heard that word so many times it had become a key people used to open my wallet. I wiped the counter with a dish towel, though it was already clean. You'll need to board Duke. Dad, come on. I'm serious. He took a breath through his nose. Fine. We'll figure it out. But you need to pay the cabin tax before you go. I don't want late fees. I folded the towel. It's already handled. Good. He paused. And when you get back, we need to talk about August. Stacy's sister may use the cabin for a few days before us. No, I said. No what? No, she may not. Brian stared again. This was the second crack. Dad, it's the family cabin. It is Frank's cabin. Same thing. No, I said. It isn't. He gave me that smile again, thinner this time. Okay. We'll talk when everybody's back. He left with Duke pulling at the leash and confusion sitting between his shoulders. I watched from the window as he loaded the dog into his SUV. My hands were steady. That surprised me. I had expected guilt. Instead, I felt something cleaner. Not joy exactly. More like air entering a room that had been closed too long. The trip was not perfect, because real life is not perfect. Frank needed extra time at the airport. Javier forgot his reading glasses. Marisol got sunburned the first afternoon despite 3 warnings. The resort mixed up 2 rooms, and Daniel argued with the front desk until Elena took over and solved it in 4 minutes. Frank's ankles swelled after the flight, and I worried the whole first night that I had made a selfish decision. But the next morning, before sunrise, he knocked on the connecting door between our rooms with his cane. You awake? He asked. I am now. I want to see it before everybody starts yelling. So I helped him dress. Khaki pants, white shirt, old cardigan even though we were in Florida, and the navy ball cap he had worn since 1992. We took the elevator down and crossed the quiet resort path while groundskeepers sprayed plants and gulls screamed over the water. The sky was still gray-blue, the sun not yet up, the beach nearly empty. Frank held my arm with one hand and his cane with the other. He moved slowly over the sand. Every few steps, he stopped to breathe. When the water reached his shoes, he froze. Want to take them off? I asked. He nodded. I knelt, untied his shoes, rolled his pant legs, and helped him step forward. The first small wave touched his feet. He closed his eyes. His grip on my shoulder tightened until it almost hurt. Dad? He did not answer right away. Another wave came. Then another. Finally he said, Your mother would have liked this. I looked out at the water because if I looked at him, I would not have been able to keep my face together. Mary too. Yes, he said. Mary too. We stood there a long time. 2 men who had spent years staying behind while other people chased views like proof of happiness. The sun broke the horizon slowly, orange light spreading over the water. Frank's feet sank a little in the wet sand. He started laughing, quietly at first, then harder, the laugh of a man surprised to still be alive for something good. Later that morning, the whole group gathered for breakfast on a patio overlooking the ocean. Javier ordered too much food. Daniel told stories about working construction in the 80s. Elena made sure Frank had his pills with orange juice. Marisol took pictures, but not in the frantic way my children did, where every moment had to become evidence online. She took one of Frank holding a coffee cup with the ocean behind him. She showed it to him first. Can I post it, Grandpa Frank? He looked startled. Why would anybody want a picture of an old man drinking coffee? She kissed the top of his head. Because he looks happy. He let her post it. That afternoon, I turned my phone off for 6 hours. I cannot remember the last time I had done that. Maybe never. We swam a little, or rather the younger one swam while Frank and I sat under an umbrella. Javier and I walked along the beach talking about nothing important. At dinner, they put Frank at the center of the table, not because he was weak or symbolic, but because everyone wanted to hear him complain about the price of fish. When the waiter asked if we were celebrating anything, Javier raised his glass and said, "Yes. We're celebrating Ray finally taking a vacation." Everyone cheered. I laughed because I did not know what else to do with that much affection. On the third night, Frank asked me to wheel him down near the water after dinner. The resort had a wooden walkway with benches along the dunes. The air smelled like salt and sunscreen. Music drifted from a bar somewhere behind us. Frank had been quieter that day, tired but content. He reached into the pocket of his cardigan and took out a key. Old brass, worn smooth. I knew it before he put it in my hand. The cabin key. Not the newer copies Brian had made with colored plastic rings. The original. The one that used to hang by my mother's kitchen door. "Dad," I said. "Ellen has the papers," he said. I closed my fingers around the key. "What papers?" "The trust. The cabin. Some accounts. Instructions." He looked toward the dark water. "I changed things years ago." I felt my stomach tighten. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," he said, "I did." "No, Dad. I didn't take care of you for that." He turned his head, and his eyes were sharper than they had been all day. "That is exactly why." I did not speak. He continued, "Your children love the cabin as a place. You love it as a responsibility. There is a difference. They love what it gives them. You protected what it meant. Your mother saw it. Mary saw it. I saw it." He tapped the armrest of the wheelchair. "I am old, not blind." My throat closed. "They'll say I manipulated you." "Let them. They'll say it's unfair." "It is unfair," he said. "Just not in the direction they mean." I looked down at the key. It was small, ordinary, almost weightless. Strange how a whole life can gather inside a piece of metal. "What did you do?" "The cabin stays in the trust while I'm alive. You manage it. After I'm gone, you decide whether to keep it, sell it, rent it, or let them use it under rules. There's money set aside for taxes for a while, but only you can authorize it. Ellen has bank records too. Everything you paid. Everything they didn't." He took a slow breath. "I also wrote them a letter." I almost laughed from shock. "You wrote a letter?" "I may be old-fashioned, but I am not dead yet." "What does it say?" He looked at the ocean again. "It says family is not a word you put under a photograph. It is who you leave room for when nobody is watching." I covered my eyes with one hand. The key pressed into my palm. I thought of Mary telling me not to beg people to make room. I thought of my children in Hawaii, smiling under Melissa's caption. I thought of all the checks, all the weekends, all the times I had chosen silence because I thought silence kept peace. It had not kept peace. It had kept access open for people who had mistaken me for a door. Frank reached over and patted my wrist. "Don't cry too much. Javier will think I said something sentimental." I laughed, and then I did cry a little, because my father had made me feel seen in a way my children had forgotten how to do. The picture that started everything was posted on the last night. I almost did not post it. I had no interest in online revenge. Social media had always felt like a room where everyone shouted how happy they were because silence would reveal too much. But Marisol took a photo after dinner that even I could not ignore. We were at one long table outside under string lights. Frank sat in front, smiling with his cane hooked over his chair. Javier had one arm around me. Daniel was laughing at something off camera. Elena was holding up a fork like she was making a toast. The ocean was dark behind us. I looked tired, sunburned, and happier than I had looked in years. I posted it with a simple caption, "Vacation with my family. Best week of my life." I did not tag my children. I did not mention Hawaii. I did not accuse anyone. I put the phone down and went to bed. By morning, it had done what truth often does when it appears without apology. It disturbed the people who depended on the lie. My phone had 27 notifications. Melissa commented first with a row of question marks, then deleted it. Brian texted at 6:12 a.m. "You're on vacation? With Grandpa?" Then at 6:18, "Why didn't you tell us?" Todd called twice. Melissa sent a longer message, "Dad, this is really hurtful. We had no idea you were planning a whole trip. The kids are confused seeing Grandpa with other relatives when we are also on a family trip. I hope you understand how this looks." I read that one 3 times. How this looks. Not how this feels. Not are you happy. Not how is Grandpa. How this looks. Then Frank's post appeared. Marisol had helped him upload his breakfast photo and another picture of him standing in the shallow water with me holding his arm. His caption, dictated in his own blunt style, read, "With my son Ray at the ocean. He stayed with me for 20 years while others traveled. This is what family means." That was the match near dry grass. Brian called first. I let it ring. Todd left a voicemail. "Dad, what the hell is Grandpa posting? Do you have any idea what kind of position this puts us in? People are asking why he wasn't with us." Melissa sent paragraphs. She said I had embarrassed her. She said I had made the family look divided. She said if I felt left out, I should have communicated like an adult. She said using Grandpa to make a point was cruel. Using Grandpa. I was standing on a balcony watching my father eat pancakes with Javier while my daughter accused me of using him because he had finally said something she did not control. Brian's panic had a second layer I did not understand until later. He had promised 2 clients a long weekend at the cabin in August as a relationship-building gesture. He had told them it was our family lake place and suggested it might help close a commercial listing. Melissa had planned a 3-generation family reunion photo there in September, complete with a photographer and matching cream sweaters. Todd had already invited 6 friends for a fall fishing weekend. Stacy's sister had told her children they could spend a week there before school started. In their minds, the cabin calendar was full. In reality, nobody had asked the man who had been quietly handed the key. I did not respond until afternoon. I sent one message to the group thread, "We'll talk when everyone is home." Todd replied immediately, "No, we'll talk now." I turned the phone off. The rest of the trip was quieter, but not ruined. That matters. In the past, one angry message from my children could have stolen a whole day from me. I would have paced, worried, drafted replies, defended myself in my head, wondered if I had been unfair. This time, I looked at my father sleeping under a beach umbrella with his hat over his eyes and thought, let them wait. For once, they could sit with discomfort they did not get to hand to me. When we flew home, Daniel came with us to help with Frank. At the airport, Frank insisted on buying a snow globe from a gift shop even though I told him we were not in a snowy place. It had a tiny beach inside and glitter that swirled like sand in a storm. "For the cabin," he said. "So people remember we got out." Back in Ohio, the air felt heavy and familiar. I unlocked my front door, carried in bags, sorted Frank's medications, started laundry, and placed the brass cabin key in the small dish by Mary's picture. The house was the same, but I was not. That is how real change often feels. Nothing outside moves, but the room no longer owns you. The dinner command arrived the next morning. Melissa sent it, probably because Brian knew I was less likely to ignore her. Dinner Friday. 7 p.m. Brian's house. Not optional. We need to discuss what happened. There it was. Not optional. I had raised these people, changed their diapers, packed their lunches, paid for their teeth, sat in hospital rooms, fixed their furnaces, covered their mistakes, and somewhere along the way they had decided they could summon me like a contractor who had missed a deadline. I showed Frank the message. He read it slowly, lips moving around the words. "Bossy," he said. "Yes." "You going?" "Yes." He looked up. "Good. I'm going too." I don't know if that's wise. I didn't ask if it was wise. I said I'm going. I almost smiled. Ellen should come. She already knows. I stared at him. "You called her?" He gave me the innocent look of a man who had been planning longer than anyone realized. "I'm 89. I use the phone sometimes." Friday came with low gray clouds and the kind of humidity that makes old injuries complain. I spent the morning gathering papers, not because Ellen needed them but because I did. There is something steadying about holding proof in your hands after years of being told your pain is just sensitivity. I pulled property tax bills from the cabin folder. Repair receipts. Bank statements showing transfers to Brian, Melissa, Todd, and cabin-related payments. Insurance notices. Email printouts where Brian asked me to cover costs just this time. Photos of the roof after storms. The invoice from the electrician I hired when even I was too old to crawl under the cabin safely. A copy of the doctor's clearance for Frank's travel, because I knew they would accuse me of recklessness. Mary's travel account statement, because I wanted to remember that the trip came from love, not spite. I also printed the cabin calendar Brian had emailed me by accident the month before, the one with his clients marked as B guests, Melissa's family reunion shoot marked M photos, and Todd's fishing weekend marked T-boys. My name was nowhere on that calendar except one note in Brian's typing: "Dad, check AC before August 2nd. That was the whole arrangement in 6 words. Ellen arrived at my house at 5:30 in a dark sedan with a leather briefcase and an expression that said she had attended many family dinners that were not really dinners. She sat at my kitchen table, accepted coffee, and reviewed the folder while Frank adjusted his tie in the hallway mirror. He wore his navy blazer, the one from my retirement party, and the ocean snow globe sat beside his chair like a witness. Ellen looked at me over her glasses. "Ray, before we go, I need to be clear. This is your father's decision. You are not obligated to explain every emotional detail tonight." "I know. Do you?" I looked down at my hands. "I'm learning." She nodded. "Good. People who benefit from your silence often call your clarity an attack. Let them." Frank grunted approval. "I like her." "I know," I said. "That's why you hired her." Brian lived in a newer subdivision where every house looked like it had been approved by the same committee that hated trees. 2-story brick front, beige siding, 3-car garage, a lawn service pattern striped into the grass. His SUV was in the driveway. Melissa's minivan sat behind it. Todd's truck was parked crooked at the curb. Through the front window, I could see people moving around the dining room. I helped Frank out of my truck. Ellen carried the briefcase. Before we reached the porch, Frank stopped and looked at me. "You ready?" he asked. "No." "Good. Only fools are ready for family." Brian opened the door before we rang. His face changed when he saw Ellen. He recognized her vaguely, probably from Frank's paperwork conversations, but he had not expected her. "What's this?" "Dinner," Frank said. "You said 7. Brian stepped aside slowly. The dining room was set like a holiday meal, though the food looked untouched. Stacy stood near the sideboard with her arms crossed. Melissa sat with red eyes, Mark beside her looking uncomfortable. Todd leaned against the wall, jaw tight. Rachel was not there. Todd's relationships rarely survived family pressure. The older grandkids had been sent downstairs, but I could hear them moving around, pretending not to listen. Melissa stood when Frank entered. Grandpa, you shouldn't have had to come into this. Frank looked at her. Then you shouldn't have made it about me. Silence dropped fast. We sat. Ellen placed her briefcase beside her chair. I put my folder on the table but did not open it yet. Brian remained standing at the head of the table, which told me plenty. He began in his professional voice. Dad, first, nobody is trying to attack you. But what happened online was unnecessary. We were blindsided. You took Grandpa on a major trip without telling us, posted it publicly, and let people believe we abandoned him. You did, Frank said. Brian's mouth tightened. Grandpa, that's not fair. Frank leaned back. Fair has had a long vacation in this family. Todd pushed off the wall. Are we really going to pretend Dad didn't do this to embarrass us? He knew exactly how it would look. I looked at him. How did it look? Todd blinked. I asked again, calmly. How did it look? Melissa wiped under one eye. It looked like we don't care about you. I waited. She looked away first. Brian sat down. Dad, if you felt excluded, you should have said something. There it was, the oldest trick in families that do not want accountability. They build a wall for 20 years and then blame you for not describing the bricks loudly enough. I did, I said. Brian frowned. When? The North Carolina trip after your mother died. Colorado. Disney. Myrtle Beach. Arizona. Yellowstone. Gatlinburg. Thanksgiving weekends at the cabin. Lily's graduation trip. Your 40th birthday. Melissa's anniversary weekend. Todd's fishing weekend where I found out because he needed me to fix the boat lift first. I asked in different ways. Sometimes directly. Sometimes carefully. Sometimes by packing a bag and waiting to see if anyone noticed. I opened the folder and took out a single photo. The old beach picture from the first trip after Mary died, printed from Facebook years ago. You noticed when I was useful. Melissa started crying harder. Mark rubbed her back. Todd rolled his eyes, but less confidently than before. Brian looked at the photo, then at me. Dad, we were young. We were dealing with Mom's death too. I know. That's why I forgave that one. Nobody spoke. I continued. I forgave a lot of ones. Enough that they became a pattern. Stacy stepped in. Ray, with respect, travel with older people is complicated. Everyone has kids. Schedules are hard. Frank raised a hand. I was younger when this started than Ray is now. Stacy closed her mouth. Ellen had not spoken yet. That made them nervous. Lawyers who speak too soon can be dismissed as hired aggression. Lawyers who sit quietly beside a closed briefcase make guilty people imagine paperwork multiplying inside. Brian noticed the folder in front of me. What is all that? Records, I said. Records of what? Cabin taxes. Repairs. Insurance. Transfers. Medication costs. Travel clearance. Emails. Things people forget when they tell a story from memory. Todd laughed once, ugly. Oh, so now we're in court? No, Ellen said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was even. Not unless someone makes that necessary. Everyone looked at her. Brian forced a smile. Ellen, right? Grandpa's attorney? Yes. With all due respect, this is a family conversation. Ellen nodded. I understand. I am here because Mr. Frank Callahan requested that certain family matters involving the cabin trust be clarified while he is present incompetent. The word competent hit the room like a glass set down too hard. Melissa looked at Frank. Grandpa, what does that mean? Frank folded his hands over the head of his cane. It means I know what I signed. Brian's face changed. There are moments when people realize the room they entered is not the room they are in. He sat back slowly. What did you sign? Ellen opened her briefcase. No drama. No flourish. Just a zipper, a folder, and the sound of paper touching wood. Several years ago, Mr. Callahan amended his living trust regarding the lake cabin and related maintenance account. There have been updates since. The current arrangement gives Raymond Callahan management authority over the cabin during Frank's lifetime. Upon Frank's passing, Raymond retains decision authority over the property under the terms outlined here. Todd stepped forward. What the hell does that mean in English? Frank looked at him. It means the cabin is not your free hotel. Todd's face flushed. Grandpa. No, Frank said. You wanted English. Brian reached for the folder. Ellen did not move it toward him. You may review copies after tonight, she said. But I will summarize. Mr. Callahan's decision was based partly on care history, financial contribution, and his personal wishes regarding preservation of the property. Brian's eyes narrowed. Care history according to who? According to Mr. Callahan, Ellen said. According to records. According to appointment logs. According to payment records. According to signed statements he made over multiple years. Brian's voice sharpened. He's 89. Frank said, and you're 42. Somehow, I still know what I signed better than you do. Todd muttered, Come on, Grandpa. Don't do that. Brian ignored him. I'm saying, Dad has been handling Grandpa's appointments. Dad has access to his accounts. Dad took him on a trip without telling us. Now suddenly there's a trust change? You can understand why that raises concerns. The room changed. Even Melissa looked up at him with alarm. Brian had crossed from defensive into accusation. Not directly, because Brian preferred polished words, but everyone heard it. He was suggesting I had steered my father. Used him. Maybe pressured him. Maybe manipulated him. After 20 years of leaving Frank with me because I was the responsible one, Brian was now implying my responsibility made me suspect. Frank's hands tightened on his cane. Ellen's expression did not change, but her voice cooled. Mr. Brian Callahan, she said, your concern was anticipated. Brian blinked. Ellen removed another set of papers. Mr. Frank Callahan requested independent competency letters from his primary physician and cardiologist during 2 separate updates. He met with me privately on multiple occasions. Raymond was not present during decision-making meetings. In fact, several appointments were arranged by Daniel Ruiz, not Raymond. Mr. Callahan also provided a handwritten statement, recorded notes, and his reasoning regarding each change. Brian's face lost color. Ellen continued, if you wish to imply undue influence, you should understand that the documentation was prepared specifically to answer that accusation. Frank looked at Brian. Because I knew you. That was the hardest sentence of the night. Melissa whispered, Brian. He looked at her, then at the table. I'm just trying to protect the family. No, Frank said. You are trying to protect access. Nobody moved. Ellen placed the competency letters on the table, not close enough for Brian to grab, but close enough for him to see they existed. I recommend everyone be careful with accusations tonight. Todd crossed his arms. Fine. So Dad gets the cabin because he played nurse better than us? I turned to him. No. He stared at me. I get responsibility for the cabin because I was already carrying it. You just didn't respect the work until it had authority attached. Melissa looked genuinely confused. Care history? I slid a stack of papers forward. These are property taxes I paid. These are roof repairs. Dock repairs. Insurance payments. Water heater. Electrical upgrade. Tree removal. AC units. Plumbing after Todd's friends left pipes frozen. Medication pickups for Grandpa during trips. Bank transfers when someone said they would pay me back. Todd's anger sharpened into defense. Are you seriously keeping score against your own kids? I looked at him for a long second. No. I started keeping receipts because everybody else kept forgetting the score existed. Mark, Melissa's husband, leaned forward and picked up one of the copies. His face tightened. Mel, this is the year we used the cabin for your birthday. Melissa whispered, I thought Brian handled that. Brian snapped, don't start. That was the first time they turned on each other. Not fully. Just a small fracture. But I had seen enough old wiring to know when a circuit was about to fail. Stacy looked at Brian. You told me your dad liked taking care of the cabin. Brian's jaw moved. He does. I almost laughed. I liked the cabin. That is not the same as liking being billed for everybody else's leisure. Frank nodded once. Melissa looked at me, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to bring me stones from the lakeshore. Dad, why didn't you tell me it was this much? I did, I said softly. You said money was tight with the kids. She covered her mouth. Todd was not ready to surrender. So what? Grandpa gives Dad the cabin because he paid some bills. That's messed up. We all have memories there. Frank's voice grew colder than I had heard in years. Memories are not maintenance. Todd stared at him. Frank continued, you have memories because Ray kept the roof from leaking on them. Nobody answered that. Brian leaned toward Ellen. Can this be challenged? There it was. Not are you sure, Grandpa? Not Dad, I'm sorry. Not how did we let this happen? His first clean instinct was challenge. Frank saw it too. His shoulders dropped, not from surprise but confirmation. Ellen said, anyone can attempt almost anything. Whether they should is another matter. Mr. Callahan's documents are current, witnessed, notarized, and supported by multiple competency letters from his physician over the years. There is also a written statement explaining his reasoning. Melissa looked at Frank. A statement? Frank reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out an envelope. His hands trembled, so I moved to help, but he waved me off. He placed it on the table himself. On the front, in shaky blue ink, he had written, to my family, if the cabin becomes a fight. Ellen asked, would you like me to read it? No, Frank said. Ray. I did not want to. My throat already hurt. But Frank pushed the envelope toward me. I opened it carefully. The paper inside was folded once. His handwriting was uneven but clear. I read aloud. To my children, grandchildren, and anyone who believes the cabin is only property. I bought that place when my hands were strong and my back was better than my judgment. Your grandmother made it a home. Ray and Mary kept it alive when I could not. After Mary died, Ray stayed. When trips happened, Ray stayed. When bills came, Ray stayed. When medicine had to be picked up, Ray stayed. When the roof leaked, Ray stayed. When everyone wanted holidays at the cabin but no one wanted the work, Ray stayed. Some of you may think I am rewarding him. I am not. I am recognizing what has already been true. Family is not the people who smile in matching shirts. Family is who leaves a chair open. For 20 years, many of you left Ray home with me. So I am leaving the cabin with him. I had to stop. The room was very still. Frank said, keep going. I breathed and continued. If you are angry, ask yourself whether you are angry because you loved the cabin, or because you assumed it would always be available without gratitude. If you want a relationship with Ray, start with the truth. If you want access to the cabin, start with respect. If you want to call this unfair, remember that unfairness began long before this paper. I lowered the letter. Melissa was crying silently now. Stacy sat down as if her knees had weakened. Mark looked at the table. Todd's face was red, but his eyes had changed. Brian stared at Frank with something like betrayal. "Grandpa," Brian said quietly, "we love that cabin." Frank nodded. "I know. You just didn't love the man who kept opening it for you." Brian flinched. I expected to feel triumph. I did not. Maybe younger men feel triumph in moments like that. Maybe men in movies do. I felt tired. I felt grief for the family we could have been if anyone had told the truth sooner. I felt relief, too, but relief is not the same as happiness. It is the body realizing it can set down a weight that should never have been carried alone. Brian looked at me. "What do you want from us?" It was a good question, though late. "I wanted a seat," I said. "For years, I wanted somebody to call and say, 'Dad, we're going to the beach, and we want you there.' Or 'Dad, we know Grandpa is a lot, and we arranged help so you can come.' Or 'Dad, you've paid enough, let us handle the cabin this year.' Or just 'Dad, thank you.' I looked at each of them. But I'm done wanting it the old way." Melissa whispered, "What does that mean?" "It means the cabin has rules now. No one uses it without asking me. No guests I don't know. Costs are shared before trips, not promised after. If something breaks, the person responsible pays. Grandpa's needs are not an excuse to exclude me. My pension is not a family emergency fund. My time is not empty just because I live alone." Todd scoffed weakly. "So we have to apply to see our own family cabin?" Frank answered before I could. "No. You have to behave like family to use mine." Todd looked away. I pulled out the calendar Brian had made. I placed it on the table and turned it toward him. "These dates are cancelled until we talk individually." Brian's eyes flashed. "Dad, I already promised people." "I know. You don't understand. These are clients." "Then you should not have promised property you did not control." Stacy looked at him. "Clients?" Brian rubbed his forehead. "It was just a weekend." Frank said, "It was never just a weekend when Ray had to clean after it." Melissa looked at the calendar and saw her own note. "The photographer deposit is non-refundable." "I'm sorry," I said. "You can take pictures somewhere else." Her face twisted with old habits, the kind that expected me to fix disappointment before it matured. "Dad," Lily was excited. I kept my voice gentle. "Then tell Lily the truth. Adults made plans before asking." Todd pointed at the calendar. "My fishing weekend was tradition." "No," I said. "It was access. Tradition includes responsibility." He looked ready to argue, then saw the stack of invoices and stopped. Stacy's voice was quieter now. "My sister already told her kids." I nodded. "That is unfortunate." She stared at me, waiting for the old Ray to step forward and solve it. He did not. Brian's voice was low. "And if we don't agree?" I met his eyes. "Then you don't use it." Another silence. Stacy said, "What about the kids?" "They love going there." That was the old lever. "The grandchildren." "I love them, and everyone knew it." For years, any boundary I tried to set dissolved when someone said the kids would be disappointed. I thought of my grandchildren downstairs, listening. I thought of Brian using their disappointment as a shield. I thought of Mary, who loved our children fiercely but never allowed them to confuse love with surrender. "The kids are welcome when adults act responsibly," I said. "I will not punish them. But I will not be manipulated through them either." Stacy looked down. Melissa wiped her face. "Dad, I am sorry." Todd muttered, "Here we go." "No," Melissa snapped, surprising everyone. She looked at him. "No, Todd. We did leave him. A lot." Then she looked back at me. I don't know why I didn't see it. I believed that she meant it in that moment. I also knew a moment is not a repair. Apologies are easy when papers are on the table and consequences are fresh. Change is what happens months later when nobody is watching. I hear you, I said. She seemed hurt that I did not rush to forgive her, but I had learned that forgiveness offered too quickly often becomes permission. Brian stood and walked to the window. For a while he said nothing. Then, without turning, he said, "People are asking questions because of Grandpa's post." Frank snorted. "Let them." Brian turned. "That affects all of us." I said, "It affected you because it was visible." "It affected me when it was happening." He had no answer. Ellen gathered some papers but left copies on the table. Mr. Frank Callahan's decisions are not up for debate tonight. Raymond has outlined conditions for cabin use. I suggest everyone take time before responding further. Todd laughed bitterly. "Nice. We get managed by Dad's lawyer now." Ellen looked at him with professional calm. "No. You are being managed by boundaries. Lawyers are only necessary when people refuse to respect them." Javier would have applauded if he had been there. I almost smiled. The dinner ended without anyone eating. That felt appropriate. It had never really been dinner. It was a room where an old family arrangement came to die. Brian walked us to the door because manners survive in strange places. On the porch, he stopped me. "Dad," he said. I turned. He looked smaller than he had at the head of the table. "Did you really feel unwanted all those years?" A father's heart is foolish. Even then, part of me wanted to protect him from the answer. But protection had helped build the lie. "Yes," I said. His eyes lowered. "I thought you preferred staying back." "No," I said. "You preferred believing that." He nodded once, like the words had landed somewhere painful. "I don't know how to fix this." "Start by not trying to get the cabin back." His mouth twitched, almost a sad smile. "Fair. And call your grandfather without needing something." He looked past me at Frank, who was already halfway to the truck with Ellen's help. "Yeah." I left before he could promise more than he understood. The weeks after that were messy, because real consequences rarely arrive clean. Todd sent 2 angry texts, then went quiet. Stacy emailed a list of dates they had hoped to use the cabin and asked whether the new policy applied to traditions already established. I replied yes. Brian called Ellen once, then apparently thought better of whatever he had planned. Melissa came to my house alone on a Sunday afternoon with a photo album. She cried at my kitchen table and admitted she had liked the version of family where she got beautiful pictures without asking who was missing. That was the most honest thing any of them said. Brian had to call his clients and explain that the cabin was unavailable. He did not tell them the whole truth, of course. Men like Brian prefer language that makes failure sound like weather. A scheduling issue. A family matter. Circumstances changed. But he called me afterward, not to complain, just to say, "That was embarrassing." I said, "I know." He waited for comfort. I said nothing else. Melissa lost her photographer deposit and moved the reunion photos to a local park. The pictures turned out fine, from what I saw. Not perfect. There was a trash can in the background of one. A toddler cried in another. Frank refused to wear cream and wore his navy cap instead. But I was in them. Not off to the side. Not behind the camera. In them. When Melissa sent me the proofs, she wrote, "I should have done this sooner." I replied, "Yes." Then, after a minute, I added, "Thank you for doing it now." Todd canceled his fishing weekend and did not speak to me for nearly a month. That was hard, but not as hard as I expected. Anger is easier to carry than being quietly erased. At least anger admits you exist. I did not throw my children away. People who benefit from your endless giving often accuse you of abandonment when you stop. But I answered calls that were not demands. I saw the grandkids. I invited them to fish at the cabin under the new rules. The first weekend I allowed, Brian came early and brought groceries he paid for himself. He cleaned gutters without being asked. He was clumsy with repentance, but he tried. Melissa began visiting Frank on Wednesdays, not every week but often enough that Frank stopped pretending he did not look forward to it. Todd stayed angry the longest. That did not surprise me. Todd had built too much of himself around never being wrong. But one afternoon in October, he showed up at the cabin with a replacement screen door in the bed of his truck. "Old one sticks," he said. "I know." He unloaded it without looking at me. "I'll put it in." I handed him a drill. We worked for 2 hours with hardly any conversation. Near the end, he stripped a screw and cursed under his breath the same way I do. I did not laugh. When the door finally swung clean, he stepped back and said, "I didn't know you paid that much." "For what?" "Everything." I wiped sawdust from my hands. "You didn't ask." He nodded. The apology did not come that day. But the door closed properly, and sometimes with Todd, that was the first sentence. Not everything healed. I will not lie for a sweeter ending. Some relatives took sides based on what version reached them first. Stacy remained polite but cool. Brian still slipped sometimes into the tone of a man negotiating rather than a son speaking. Melissa overcorrected for a while, inviting me to every minor event until I had to tell her I did not need guilt invitations either. Frank's health continued to decline, because no family lesson stops time. Some days he remembered the ocean clearly. Some days he asked when Mary was coming to dinner. On those days, I sat beside him and said she would be late, and he accepted that answer with the peaceful confusion of a man already living partly in memory. But the cabin changed. Or maybe I finally saw it correctly. I went there more often that fall. Not to clean up after people. Not to prepare it for someone else's weekend. I went because the place was mine to care for now, not mine to be used through. I fixed the loose porch rail. I replaced the rusted mailbox. I cleaned Mary's daylily bed and found 2 blooms still stubbornly orange among weeds. I put Frank's ridiculous beach snow globe on the mantel, beside an old photo of my mother holding a stringer of fish and Mary laughing at something outside the frame. One Saturday, I invited Lily to come up with me for the day. Just Lily. She was 13, the same age Todd had been when he started pretending not to need anyone. I picked her up at Melissa's house early. Melissa came out with a backpack full of snacks and sunscreen, fussing the way mothers do when they are trying to show they respect a boundary but still want to manage the weather. "Call me when you get there," she said. "I will." Lily climbed into my truck and looked around like she was entering a museum. "Mom says you've had this truck forever." "Not forever. Since 2004. That's before I was born. Like I said. Not forever." She smiled and put her backpack between her feet. On the drive, she asked questions. Real ones. Why did great-grandpa buy the cabin? Did Grandma Mary like it? Did I really fix wires in hospitals? Was it scary? Did her mom really collect rocks? I answered all of them. When we got to the cabin, I gave Lily a broom and showed her how to sweep the porch from corners outward so dust did not just move around. Then I showed her how to test a GFCI outlet and why you never ignore a flickering light near water. She listened seriously. At lunch, we sat on the dock eating sandwiches from wax paper. She kicked her sneakers against the boards. "Grandpa Ray?" "Yeah." "Were you mad we went on trips without you?" I looked across the lake. The old version of me would have softened the answer until it taught her nothing. Yes. She was quiet. "I was not mad at the kids," I said. "You were children. Children go where adults take them." "But yes, I was hurt." She nodded slowly. "Mom cried about it." "I know. She said grown-ups can be selfish without meaning to. That's true. Does not meaning to make it okay? I looked at her, this child with Melissa's eyes and questions sharper than most adults. No. It just means they still have a chance to become better when they realize it. She seemed satisfied with that. After lunch, she swept the porch again even though it did not need it. Before we left, she took a picture of the old brass key in the door and asked if she could print it for a school photography project. I said yes. She titled it The Key That Waited. I did not ask where she learned to see things that way. Maybe children notice more than adults think. Maybe old pain can become a better lesson if someone tells the truth in time. One cold morning in November, I woke before sunrise at the cabin. Frank was still sleeping in the bedroom. The lake was covered in mist. I made coffee in the old percolator because the sound reminded me of my mother. The floorboards were cold under my socks. I carried 2 mugs to the screened porch out of habit, then remembered Mary was not there to take one. That old pain visited, but it did not own the room. I set the second mug beside her photo on the small table anyway. Frank shuffled out a few minutes later in his robe and navy cap. You drinking alone? Waiting for you. Good answer. He lowered himself into the porch chair with the cushion that needed replacing. I handed him the mug with more milk than coffee, the way he liked it now. We sat without speaking while the sun lifted behind the trees. The lake turned silver. A truck moved somewhere on the road beyond the pines. The cabin smelled like coffee, old wood, and the faint dust of a place that had survived many versions of us. After a while, Frank said, "You still sad?" I thought about it. Some. Good, he said. I looked at him. Good? Means you didn't turn mean. I smiled. No. I didn't turn mean. He nodded toward the key dish by the door. The old brass key lay there, not hidden, not begged for, not passed around carelessly. You know what that is? A key. No, he said. It's permission. To do what? To stop knocking. I looked out at the lake. For 20 years, I had been knocking on doors my own family kept closing politely. Could I come this time? Is there room? Would it be too much trouble? Do you need me, or do you want me? I had mistaken endurance for love and availability for belonging. I had let my children call me dependable when what they meant was convenient. I had stayed behind so many times that I almost forgot I could leave. I did not destroy my family. I did not take revenge in the way angry people understand it. I did not empty accounts to watch my children suffer. I did not sell the cabin out from under them the next morning, though I had the authority to make their lives uncomfortable if discomfort had been my goal. I simply stopped funding the lie that a family could exclude a man from every joy and still claim his labor as love. The house I returned to was still quiet. My wife was still gone. My father was still old. My children were still imperfect. I was still a man with sore knees, rough hands, and more years behind me than ahead. But something essential had shifted. When my phone rang, I looked at the name before answering. When someone asked for money, I asked why. When someone invited me, I listened for whether the invitation had a job hidden inside it. When I went to the cabin, I sat down before fixing anything. In December, we held a small dinner at the church basement Javier loved. Not a holiday performance. Just soup, bread, folding chairs, kids running between tables, old men complaining about the Browns, women packing leftovers before anyone admitted they wanted them. Brian came with his family. Melissa brought pie. Todd arrived late but carried in a case of water without being asked. Frank sat between me and Javier, wearing his navy cap indoors because nobody had the heart to tell him otherwise. At one point, my granddaughter Lily climbed into the chair beside me and said, "Grandpa Ray, are we going to the cabin this summer?" I looked at Brian, who looked back without interfering. "Yes," I said. "We can." She smiled. Everybody? I thought about that word. Everybody. It had hurt me once. It had stood under pictures that erased me. But children should not inherit every wound adults create. Everybody who helps, I said. She considered that seriously. I can sweep. I know you can. She leaned against my arm. Can great-grandpa come? I looked at Frank, who was arguing with Javier about whether soup counted as dinner. If he wants to. Lily nodded like the matter was settled. Then she ran off to chase her cousin. Brian came over a few minutes later and sat beside me. For once, he did not need anything. We watched the kids circle the room. I booked a place for spring break, he said. I felt the old reflex tighten, then waited. Smaller trip, he continued. Just a few days in Tennessee. We'd like you to come. Grandpa too, if his doctor says it's okay. If not, I can stay back with him for part of it so you can still go. I looked at my son. His face was careful. Not perfect. Not fully transformed. But careful in a way that had room for someone besides himself. Send me the details, I said. He nodded. Okay. That was all. No music. No tears. No big speech. But it was the first invitation in years that did not sound like an invoice. Later that night, after I drove Frank home and helped him into bed, I stood in my kitchen under the soft yellow light above the stove. Mary's picture was on the shelf near the cabin key. The ocean snow globe sat beside it now. I shook it once and watched glitter swirl around a tiny plastic palm tree. Frank had called it proof we got out. Maybe it was. My phone buzzed. A message from Melissa. A photo from the church basement dinner. Frank in the middle. Javier laughing. Me turned slightly toward Lily, listening. Brian in the background stacking chairs. Todd carrying trash bags. No matching shirts. No beach. No perfect caption. Just a blurry, warm, ordinary picture of people making room. Melissa had written, "This one has everyone who stayed." I sat down at the kitchen table. For a long time, I just looked at it. Then I saved the photo, locked my phone, and turned off the light. Spring came late that year. Frank made it to Tennessee, though we kept the trip short and Brian did stay back with him one afternoon so I could hike a flat trail with Lily and Caleb. I did not know what to do with that at first. I kept checking my phone, expecting a problem. Brian finally texted me a picture of Frank asleep in a chair with a blanket over him and wrote, "We're fine. Take your time." 4 words. Nothing poetic. But I stood on that trail under bare branches and felt something loosen. The cabin opened for summer under the new rules. I typed them on one page, plain and simple, and taped a copy inside the kitchen cabinet. If you use it, you clean it. If you break it, you pay for it. If you invite someone, Ray approves it first. Frank gets the downstairs room if he comes. No one is excluded because they are inconvenient. The first weekend everyone came, it rained. Of course it did. The grandkids played cards on the floor. Todd grilled under an umbrella and complained the whole time. Melissa washed dishes. Brian fixed the loose step without announcing it. Stacy brought groceries and handed me the receipt before I could ask. Small things. Not enough to erase 20 years, but enough to prove people can learn a new pattern if the old one stops rewarding them. Frank sat on the screened porch watching rain hit the lake. Lily sat beside him with a notebook, writing something for school. I brought them lemonade. Frank looked at the room behind him, noisy, imperfect, full. Better, he said. Perfect? I asked. He snorted. Don't get greedy. A month later, Frank's health took a turn. Not dramatic at first. More sleeping. Less appetite. More days when names slipped loose from faces. Dr. Patel said we were entering a different season. I knew what he meant. Families speak in weather when the truth is too large. My children came more often then. Maybe guilt brought them at first. I do not care. Sometimes guilt is the bridge people cross before love remembers the way. Brian sat with Frank and watched baseball. Melissa brought soup. Todd fixed the back step at my house because he noticed it wobbling. None of it made them perfect. It made them present. Present was all Frank had ever wanted from them, and by then, it was all I asked. One evening near the end of summer, I drove Frank to the cabin for what I suspected might be his last overnight there. He was thin, tired, wrapped in a blanket despite the warm air. The kids wanted to come, but Frank said, "Just Ray." That stung them. I saw it. But they respected it. We sat on the porch as the sun went down. The lake turned orange, then purple, then dark. Mosquitoes tapped against the screen. Frank held the brass key in his hand, turning it slowly with his thumb. "You did good," he said. "With what?" He looked annoyed. "Don't make an old man list things." I smiled. "After a while," he said, "you know, leaving you the cabin was easy." It did not look easy at dinner. That was the fun part. I laughed softly. He continued, "The hard part was watching you think you had to earn what should have been given." I did not answer. Some truths arrive too late to change the years behind them, but they still change the air. Frank looked toward the lake. "Don't become the keeper of everyone's guilt." "What do you mean?" "They'll try to make it up to you. Let them try. But don't spend the rest of your life managing their shame. That's just another job." I thought about that. "Then what do I do?" "Live," he said. "And when you invite them, make sure it's because you want them there. Not because you're afraid they'll leave." That was the last advice my father gave me at the cabin. He passed that winter, in his sleep, in the small bedroom at my house, with the ocean snow globe on the dresser and a baseball game playing softly because silence made him restless. My children came. Javier came. Ellen came to the funeral but sat near the back like a professional who had accidentally become part of the story. At the church basement afterward, people told Frank stories. Most were funny. Frank hated sad speeches. Brian stood and admitted, in front of everyone, that his grandfather had taught him a hard lesson about what family costs when only one person is paying. He did not perform it. He did not cry dramatically. He just said it and sat down. Todd did not speak publicly. Later, at the cabin, he placed a new brass hook by the door for Frank's cap. He hung the cap there, stepped back, and wiped his face with his sleeve when he thought nobody saw. I saw. I said nothing. Men in my family had always needed silence for certain kinds of grief. The trust became final without a fight. That surprised some people. It did not surprise me. Brian had looked into challenging it, I am sure. Maybe he even had a consultation. But the documents were solid, and more than that, Frank's letter had done what legal paper cannot always do. It had made the moral case too plain to deny without becoming ugly in their own eyes. The cabin remained under my authority. I kept it. Not because it was worth a fortune. It was not. Not because I wanted power. I had spent too many years under the weight of other people's convenience to enjoy controlling them. I kept it because some places are built out of labor and memory, and selling them too quickly is another form of letting careless people define value. The next summer, we held a smaller family weekend there. No matching shirts. No professional photographer. No captions arranged before the day happened. Everyone who came brought something. Brian brought charcoal and fixed the dock rail. Melissa brought groceries and asked before moving furniture for pictures. Todd brought fishing gear and taught Caleb how to tie a knot. Javier sat under a tree and told lies about how handsome he had been in 1969. Lily swept the porch without being asked. I made coffee in the morning and watched them from the kitchen doorway. For a moment, I saw the family we might have been. Then I corrected myself. No, not the family we might have been. The family we were becoming after the bill came due. That evening, Melissa posted a picture. I admit I tensed when I saw her phone come out. Old wounds do not vanish just because people behave better for a season. But before she posted, she brought the picture to me. "Is this okay?" she asked. It was a photo of the porch. Frank's cap on the hook. Mary's daylilies blooming by the steps. Lily sweeping in the background. My coffee mug on the rail. No big group pose. No slogan. No performance. "What's the caption?" I asked. She showed me. "Room for everyone who shows up." I nodded. "That's fine." She posted it. A few people liked it. A few commented hearts. The world did not shake. But I stood there with the old brass key in my pocket and felt something like peace. The next morning, I drove to the cabin alone. Snow had dusted the pines overnight, though summer memories still lived in the wood. The lake was dark and still. I unlocked the door with the old brass key, stepped inside, and listened to the quiet. Not the lonely kind. The honest kind. I made coffee, opened the curtains, and watched pale winter light spread across the floorboards Mary once wanted to sand and refinish. Maybe I would do that in spring. Maybe Brian would help. Maybe Todd would complain and still show up. Maybe Melissa would bring the kids and sweep the porch with Lily. Maybe some things would heal. Maybe some would not. But the chair by the window was mine now. Not because a document said so, though the document mattered. Not because my father chose me, though that healed something I did not know was still bleeding. It was mine because I had stopped asking people who benefited from my absence to define my place. I sat with my coffee until the sun cleared the trees. The cabin was smaller than my children remembered, older than the pictures made it look, and more work than any of them had ever wanted to admit. But every room knew my name. Every board held some mark of my hands. Every window looked out on a life I no longer had to earn by being useful. For the first time in 20 years, I did not wonder why they had not taken me with them. I had finally arrived where I belonged.